Okay, we're going to pick up in Jeremiah 17 today. Uh, and one of the famous verses in chapter 17, Jeremiah 17:10, I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind. And we know that there is no defrauding God. That's the thing. We can defraud one another, but we can never defraud God. And so we pick up, we are still talking about Israel's sin, and this is a statement of the finality. It is too late now. We know this. At the point of this, it is too late for repentance. Things have gone so long, and judgment is here. Judgment is set. The sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron, meaning you, it's done. With the point of a diamond, it is engraved on the tablet of their heart and the horns of the altar. And that's where sin is burned away. Uh, the It is engraved. Their sin is engraved on the horns of the altar, which that's extreme. While their children remember their altars and their wooden images by the green trees on the high hills. And that verse 2 is just a statement of idolatry. Uh, the nature of it. What would we say today? While their children have their phone in their hand and are learning about the world's philosophies and embracing the way that the world thinks of things, the way the internet tells them to dress and think about sin. That's what we'd say today. In ancient times, they said the children are focused on the altars to these pagan deities, the wooden images or the little statues they worship, green trees. They would do their fertility dances underneath big trees, and they would worship on a high hill. A high place was a place of worship. And so you hear that throughout the Old Testament under big oak trees and on high hills um, are the places where these deities are worshiped. And as we've said many times, generally a lot of these pagan things are sexual. And so, they did this thing. We don't do this so much today. One difference today, now we are very sexual. The world is very sexual, but they don't care about a God and what God thinks about sexuality and the appropriateness of things. In the ancient world, they would say, "Oh yeah, we're out doing sexual stuff with people, other people, but we're worshiping. We are trying to get the gods to make it rain. We're trying to help our society." So they had that little extra, always, no, 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 no. I wasn't having an affair. I was worshiping the fertility god, trying to get it to rain. So, talking about the idolatry of Manasseh, we looked a couple weeks ago. Manasseh was Josiah's daddy, who reigned over 50 years in Judah and was wicked. And so, just a refresher, he went so far as he took an Asherah pole and he put it in the temple. In 2 Kings 21:7, then Manasseh set the carved image of Asherah that he had made in the house which the Lord had said to David and his son, into the temple. In this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen from many tribes, I will put my name forever. So in the Holy of Holies, I don't know exactly where in the temple he did, he erected an Asherah pole. Now, who is Asherah? Well, every polytheistic system, different nations had different systems, but they were all basically the same gods with different names. If you remember from mythology, Roman mythology called him Jupiter, Greek mythology called him Zeus. Same god, just a different name and different culture. So they were all basically the same gods. And so Asherah was the fertility goddess, the mother goddess. Uh, she is also known as Ishtar. Um, she it is possible that the celebration, Easter, may come from her name, Ishtar, which is, and that's one of the things that people like to poke at Christianity over. Uh, if our holidays have a Catholic origin, many times when the Catholics took over pagan societies, they would not change their celebrations. They would just change the name of their celebration. As you know, you probably know, when the church took over Rome, they had a winter feast called Saturnalia, and it was you know it was kind of like a Mardi Gras, where you would just do debauchery for a season, eat too much, and indulge in every fleshly pleasure. And the main date was December 25th. So most likely Jesus was born like in October, based on the shepherds and the different clues that we can get. But when the Catholic Church took over, they took Saturnalia, which was a long festival. I think Saturnalia was 12 days, and they made it Christmas instead, a celebration of the birth of Jesus. And so, I have mixed feelings about that. Um, it's what is in your heart. Ultimately, it's what is in your heart. And so, if you are celebrating Jesus' birth, it don't matter what ancient traditions celebrated from. But if you notice, we celebrate Jesus' birth, Easter, and it is debated what that word means. I'm not telling you it's definitely a celebration of Ishtar, but the Ishtar Spring Festival was the rebirth of, plants start growing again, and that was Asherah and Ishtar's job, was to make the plants come back after winter. And what are the symbols of Easter? They're all fertility symbols. Eggs, and so forth, rabbits, and so forth. So this is not a new thing that Manasseh did. We got to be really careful about this, embracing worldly things and adapting them to Christian. We want to make sure, and I think we very much are noting the birth of Jesus. I say we in a greater sense. We don't want to get into. We could very easily slip into pagan worship of things, and so we got to be careful about that. Manasseh did it back in the time. Um, and so Josiah, Manasseh's son, this was his daddy that did all this wicked stuff. Uh, Josiah, later on in 2 Kings 23:6, brought out the wooden image from the temple to the brook of Kidron. And I have a couple different things in Kidron. The Temple Mount, where the temple was, sits on the highest point in Jerusalem. And as you come out the east gate, and we'll look at the east gate comes up, or maybe it's in my Sunday sermon. No, I think it's in Jeremiah. As you come out that east gate, you go down the hill into the Kidron Valley. There's a creek, the Kidron Brook, that runs down east of Jerusalem. And when you get to the foot of Jerusalem, there is a ravine, and they have at the bottom of Jerusalem, they have the dung gate. They call it different things, but that's where they take out the trash and they throw it over the ravine, and then guys would go down there and burn the trash and bury it and stuff like that. And that was the valley. It was owned by a man named Hinnon. And so it came to be his son's property. So Ben Hinnon, it was the valley of Ben Hinnon where they burned trash. And so it smelled like fire and brimstone all the time, and sulfur, burning sulfur down there in the valley of Ben Hinnon. And of course, the Hebrew word for valley is Gah, and so later it became Gehenna in the New Testament. It was a metaphor for hell. Anyway, he took the image from the temple to the brook, the creek of Kidron, in this valley east of Jerusalem, and burned it there, and ground it to ashes, and threw its ashes on the graves of the common people, because that's who worshipped Asherah. Now, the Israelites came from a world of polytheism. The Israelites always struggled with polytheism. They wanted to adapt because that's what everybody did. All the cool people, all the people that had great inventions and wealth around the world worshiped these polytheistic deities. The idea of one God who created everything and there being no other gods, that is a radical thought. It's not so much to us because we've had the Bible for 4,000 years that's been saying there's one God that created everything. And so we take that for granted as true. They did not, people in the Bible times. It was a radical teaching. So the Israelites were called to do something different from everybody else. And it was hard. And so the common people would worship Yahweh, and then they would go home and get their idols out and worship Asherah. They found one big archaeological find. There is an island in the Nile River down in Egypt called Elephantine Island. And for some reason, there was a garrison there of troops, a fortress on that island of Hebrew troops stationed there. I guess this goes back to maybe back to the slavery in Egypt. I'm not sure, but there was a garrison of Hebrew troops that lived there. They found it, and on the wall, somebody drew stick figures, and they said Yahweh, the God of the Bible, and his wife Asherah, because in Canaanite mythology, um, um, Baal, the king of the gods, his wife was Asherah. And so they said, well, that must be Yahweh's wife. And so it is not, but it was a thing held in the common people still worshiped the fertility goddess. So he threw ashes on their graves. Evidently, the image, then after he did this, another one was taken and put back in the temple after Josiah. Uh, After Manasseh died, because Josiah, yeah, okay. Josiah took it out during his reforms and burned it in the Kidron Valley outside the city. I'm just saying the same thing there. After Josiah's death, the people resumed their idolatry. So this is the condition we're at. A king would come along and begin getting rid of all these places of worship, but then when he left, they would go back. The Asherah poles were set up again. If you remember, Gideon, uh, Gideon had an Asherah pole in his yard when God called him. And actually, the name Gideon means hewer, one that cuts down. Because one of the first things the angel of the Lord told him to do was cut down the Asherah pole. And that's what his name actually means. Um, it's a nickname, hewer. Gideon is a nickname. Possibly, they think that this Asherah pole was the idol of jealousy mentioned in Ezekiel 8:5. Ezekiel said, and he is in Babylonian captivity, he said, I lifted my eyes to the north, and there, north of the altar gate, was this image of jealousy in the entrance. Uh, a carved image of Asherah. So punishment is coming. This is an old theme in Jeremiah. Um, and you, even yourself, shall let go of your heritage which I gave you. This is the punishment of the Israelites. And so I want to think about that. That jumped out. I bolded that phrase because that jumped out at me. The people were not living for God. They were practicing idolatry and worshiping other gods. But they still had a heritage of religiousness. so if you would ask these people, are you a faithful Hebrew? Are you faithful to Yahweh? They would all say yes. And then they would go and get out. They would go home and get out, because Hebrew Yahweh worship, you couldn't acknowledge the fertility mother. So they would keep them a statue at home, a lot of them, and they would go home and they would pray to Asherah to make it rain and let the crops come up. And they kept that heritage. And you, even yourself, shall let go of your heritage which I gave you, the heritage in Yahweh. It's done. You have deserted it. This is judgment. I will cause you to serve your enemies in a land which you do not know, for you have kindled a fire in my anger, which will burn forever. And then there is a poem. This next section is a poem that contrasts righteousness and evil. I thought this was interesting. Thus says Yahweh, cursed is the man who trusts in man, who puts your faith in men. That is all throughout the Bible. Cursed is the man who spends too much time watching athletes. Cursed is the man who spends too much time on politics. Cursed is the man, etc., etc., etc. Now, these are all things that I have interest in, and I battle my flesh continually to have a balance of where I am participating at an appropriate level in politics, while at appropriate level where my sports is a nice pastime and not a passion of mine. Cursed is the man who trusts in man and makes flesh his strength, what he craves. And by that, flesh means what humans can do. One of my great impressions when I went to New York City and worked up there in a Baptist mission, was how secular it was. I did not sense a great evil in New York City per se. I mean, you can get into any evil you want to. But what really struck me coming from Burke County and going to New York City was that anything that man can do, New York City is like a testament to mankind, what mankind can achieve. I mean, it's amazing, but there's so many people, it's overwhelming. And I think New York City is a place where the best that man can do, you'll find in New York City. It is a testament to man's abilities and what man can do. And that's a dangerous thing. It's not necessarily evil per se, but it is a very dangerous thing, because when you put too much faith in man, you're going to stumble, always. Cursed is the man whose heart departs from the Lord. And that's the trouble. It's okay for men to be great athletes. It's okay for them to be great leaders, great politicians, highly educated, really smart, really funny, really good singers, to be physically beautiful. None of these things are a problem until that becomes a priority over God. And we depart from, the heart departs from the Lord and fixates on something that man can achieve or something man can do. You mean, whether it's yourself or somebody else. We were not created to worship one another or to be worshiped. One of the worst things a congregation can do to a pastor is to like him too well, to where nothing he can do is wrong, where he's infallible. That messes a pastor up. I think it'll be a short time before a pastor would go to stumbling and making some bad mistakes when people begin to praise him too much. We were not made to receive too much praise. Now, we all need a pat on the back every now and then, sure. But mankind is made to worship God, not to worship one another. And it is especially corrupting to receive worship and adulation and too much affection. That's why you have a spouse. Your spouse is supposed to be the one that praises you and pours affection on you. But those other things, too much attention will take your heart depart from the Lord. For he shall be like a shrub in the desert. These are creosote bushes, and they are tough creatures, creosote bushes. He shall be like a shrub in the desert, and he shall not see when good comes, but shall inhabit the parched places of the wilderness in a salt land which is not inhabited. Um, you are cursed. You are alone. Uh, life is not. Life is just survival. It's not satisfying. A righteous man. Verse 7, blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose hope is in the Lord. What are you putting your hope in? For he shall be like a tree planted by the waters. This is an image, the same image is in the Psalms. A tree planted in water as opposed to a bush out in the desert, which spreads out its roots by the river, and will not fear when heat comes, when hard times come, because its nutrition, its water, its sustenance is from the Lord. But its leaf will be green and will not be anxious in the year of drought, nor will cease from yielding fruit. Now, one of the hardest sins for all people is the sin of worry. And I mean, it is very difficult. We live in a broken world, and it's unsatisfying, and it creates fear in us, and we're lonely. Everything just down the list, A, B, C, D, E. But worrying, for a believer, too much worrying, at some point, worry is atheism. It's short-term atheism. Because God says, I intend good for you, and I'm working a plan, and as part of my plan, you've hit a hard day, you've hit a bad day, and it creates fear, but I'm taking you on a journey. And what you need to do is stand back up and keep going.
How can you get
Well, I said that's the biggest trouble, isn't it? I'm confessing. We all do it. God wants us to, God knows that this world is broken and it's going to make us worry. God knows it. But He wants us to trust Him more than the things that worry us. And that's hard. That's a challenge, isn't it, for all of us? But trust God more than the things that worry you. You know what you're doing when you trust the worry more than you do God? You're making whatever it is an idol. Whether it's financial trouble, I know for most of you, because I am a parent too. You have grown kids that you worry about and grandkids that you worry about. At some point, it becomes sinful, and I just say it for all of us. Let's just be honest. It is short-term atheism. That maybe God didn't know this was going to happen. Maybe God is surprised by this. No, none of that is true. We stand back up from our anxiety. We seek God's face, and we do what we can to help the situation. And we keep going. We persevere. We keep moving forward in that. Uh, and that's what it's saying. Notice the way it says this. It's like a tree planted by the river. It's going to get hot. There's going to be anxiety, but that tree has a source. The most important thing, that water, it's got a source to the water. And God is our river. It will not be anxious in the year of drought. The Bible nowhere says that life is going to be easy and that life is going to be fulfilling. Because what we want to do is we want to find fulfillment in other people. We want to find fulfillment in a bank account. We want to find fulfillment in entertainment or sports or anything but God. And we're like, the more things that we try to get satisfaction from, the further out in the desert we push ourselves. And we're like an old creosote bush. He says, Believe in me. And don't be anxious when the drought comes, because I am your water. Nor cease from yielding fruit. Do you see that? Not only are we able to relax in Jesus because he's our source of water, but we continue to produce fruit. That's what I want. I want to be able to get back up and keep going. All of us have anxiety to differing degrees, and I have great mercy on it. Why would anyone choose to turn from God? Well, verse 9 says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know the human heart? I, Yahweh, search hearts, I test minds, even to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his doings. In other words, I know the truth. I know the real truth about why you do what you do. You can trick people, but you can't trick me. Like a partridge that hatches an egg she has not laid, so are those who get wealth by unjust means, who are craving money and they don't care how they get it, craving whatever. At midlife, they lose their riches and become poor old fools. And I think that last phrase doesn't necessarily mean they literally lose their riches, but at some point, everybody will realize, I thought money would, when I got to a certain amount, I thought it would be enough. And it's not. I want more. And so forth. I think this is a spiritual statement as much as it is a literal one. You put all your intensity into achieving something man can do: wealth, beauty, ability, strength, likes, popularity, all these things, and at some point you realize you're still not satisfied. It doesn't fix it. So Jeremiah's solution to sin was to focus on the majesty of God. A glorious high throne from the beginning is the place of our sanctuary. O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be ashamed. Those who depart from me shall be written in the earth, because they have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters. Jeremiah prays for deliverance and vindication. He says, heal me, O Lord, and I shall be healed. Save me, and I shall be saved, for you are my praise. Indeed, they say to me, where's the word of the Lord? Let it come now. As for me, I have not hurried away from being a shepherd who follows you, God, nor have I desired the woeful day, the day of judgment. You know what came out of my lips. It was right there before you. So here it takes a turn to specific failings, and he goes off on the Sabbath day. And the Sabbath day is not the only way that we worship God, by keeping the Sabbath day, but it is indicative of a bigger problem. People stopping keeping the Sabbath day. They took that seventh day as a personal day, a day for them to do stuff for them, and they began to forsake. Shabbat means rest, and they stopped Shabbating. They stopped resting, and it is indicative of the deeper problems. And so the rest of this chapter, he is talking about the failings of, especially about not keeping the Sabbath. And so I think that'd be a good place for us to quit today and pick up there. I also have a section. It just comes in. Is it here? Yeah. It says, go out to the gates where the kings come in, and there's a lot of speculation on which gate that was. They believe that it is the east gate, and it's called the Golden Gate in Jerusalem. And as I was looking at that, there's a lot of interesting things about that gate, and there's a lot of prophecy about that gate. It was sealed, as we'll see next week, by a Ottoman Turk sultan. Sealed that gate because he was worried, because Jewish tradition said the Messiah is going to come in through that gate. And he wanted to seal it to prevent the Messiah from coming to Jerusalem. This is a good place for us to cut off this week. Are there any questions or comments about that? John?
You talked about money, and the more you got, and
Right.
I read one place years ago that John D. Rockefeller was one of the most wealthy men in the U.S. and maybe the world. And on his deathbed, he said his last words were, "Just one more dollar."
Just one more dollar. It doesn't satisfy. That's the human equation. Everybody gets to a place sooner or later, and the things that they have invested in have not given the return that we, on our energy and our intensity and our worship and our suffering, we don't get a return. We don't get paid back. And they're like, what's this life about? We can even do that to God if we get self-centered. People sometimes get to a point and say, well, God, I have served God, but He hasn't given me what I want. And they get dissatisfied with God too. And the reason is because they're focusing on themselves. And I thought today's was a good point. Cursed is the man who sets his heart on the flesh, who puts his faith in man, because it's never going to be enough. Whatever we can achieve for one another is never going to be enough. Anything else? Okay, let's pray and stop right there.